slide.
No public comment.
Thank you. So Leslie had mentioned that we had not received any public comments. For folks who are maybe watching, there is opportunity to provide comment, and you can get in touch with our office to learn more about how to do that. We definitely want to make sure that the public has an opportunity to weigh in on these really important topics, and the one that will be discussed shortly is really important.
Okay. Jesus, do you want to do the meeting norms?
Sure. Just remember to stay engaged, speak your truth, practice kindness, experience comfort, take risks, listen for understanding, expect and accept closure, and members speaking to you using their raise hand feature.
I'd also like to add that as part of the meeting, since it is hybrid, if you're not speaking, if you could stay on mute, that would be great. So as we're calling the people who have their hands raised, we can hear them clearly. Thank you.
Great.
Next slide.
Discussion. So I'll start just really briefly for some context. This is a really important conversation. I think, and it's a continuation of the previous conversations we had. When we look at the climate plan, there's nothing easy in it. It's trying to pivot an organization and a community to meet long-term climate goals of carbon neutrality is a challenge, and it's a challenge everywhere. And I think San Antonio is actually in a really good place. We have a strong commitment from council. We have a good plan that needs to be updated. We have a great partner in CPS Energy. But again, when we look at our emissions profile, a big chunk of it is driven by the power produced by CPS. We turn the lights on, that's coming from somewhere. And as we start talking about electrification as a method of climate mitigation, whether we're talking about electrifying buildings or transportation sector, there's implications because it's only as effective as the carbon intensity and the consumption of CPS supply. So I just want to start by commending Angela as the CPS representative for, a really sort of transformative process. It's completely different than how CPS has done it in the past. I also want to thank Dee Dee, and I know Anak was not on the call, and Dr. Kansu for all the work that you've done in this pushing. And that's what this is. It's a balance of pushing and CPS trying to adapt, and I think when you look at the outcomes, it's a great precedent, and I think at the end of the day, there's a shift from coal is great. I think this conversation really is around some of those fine-tuned implications, and again, looking at meeting climate objectives. And I before we sort of turn it over to you, Melissa, I also want to thank Dr. Perkins and Ryan for really weighing it, and going through all of this material and going to the meetings and putting together what is a well-thought, proposal for this group to discuss. And I think the opportunity is, for Melissa and Dr. Kansu to sort of lead this conversation. Nothing's set in stone. This is about, if there's edits, if there's comments, if there's concerns, this is the time to hash it out, and we can make those adjustments. And if we're successful, there's some position statement. I think, regardless of what that statement is, I think it's important for this committee to potentially be on the record somehow. Either this is the best thing since sliced bread, and we're super supportive, or this is great, but please, consider this, because again, this is a big driving force for the climate plan, and I think it's important for this group to again, it's complicated stuff with a lot of data, so I know that's one of the challenges is it's a lot really fast. But I again want to thank you all for coming to this special meeting and being open to having this conversation.
Okay. And so as we jump into discussion, again, I mentioned that some of you may have received phone calls, because I just wanted to make sure that you received the document, that you read it ahead of time, and that we made sure we incorporated everyone's comments and feedback. As Doug said, this is important for us to really identify and consider what's the best statement we want to move forward with. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Ryan to open up the layout of the statement that was developed by the committee.
Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate that. Yeah, hope everyone's had a chance to read. I tried to make it brief. 3 pages isn't brief, but we're trying to get a lot in, as others have said. Certainly not going to read in entirety. We can focus on sections, however is helpful for this group to kind of look at what's being proposed here. It starts off with kind of a framing of the situation, looking at CPS's important history as a leader in to be, again, kind of blunt, the majority of actual emissions reductions that San Antonio has had to date, while also recognizing, as Doug said, that stationary emissions make up a huge chunk. It may no longer be the largest category. It's right on the edge between transportation as far as current inventory, but it's a huge amount of our total emissions. And of that, of course, the vast majority is produced by CPS because we all want them to, right? We want the energy. So this isn't about culpability. It's about recognizing the reality of how impactful energy generation is to the entire cap. I go into what I hope is brief detail about the role and purpose of the technical committee, and then we brought out some things about the RAC that were particularly notable, looking at this from the lens, not just of a general community organization, but as a board vested with watching out for what would be the best interests of the community relating to climate issues. So looking at the inclusivity and the transparency of the process. And one thing that came out that we can either spend more time on or not, but the RAC did something that I'm not sure was in their original remit, and I may be incorrect on that, which was to specifically solicit and utilize a prioritization or a weighting mechanism so that they could communicate to CPS what types of performance within these different scenario options were not just the most important versus the least, but how they weighted against each other. And that produced some really interesting results. It was a really interesting exercise. We can always say maybe it could have been broader. There was also a survey they conducted online, but it produced some really interesting results because it allowed us to move beyond just the numbers and to interpret what the people of San Antonio filtered through this process valued in comparison to each other. And then that produced some really interesting results, most notable of which being that Portfolio 9, which happens to be a portfolio with a strong build out of renewables, performed really, really well across all of the categories, and in particular in summation. So without the weighting, Portfolio 9 still does well in individual categories. But when you pay attention to which categories the RAC said were the most important and by what ratio, it really stands out as the top performing portfolio, which isn't necessarily how it was presented in every forum. And we then kind of build onto that is extolling some of the benefits of Portfolio 9, not because the subcommittee or this committee has a vested stake in that one in particular, but in noting that often those of us who promote climate issues or advocate for the cap are talking about trade-offs. It's important to fight climate change, even if it's not the most affordable, even if it has these other risks and concerns. And what's notable here is that that's not the case. It's kind of a net plus situation where the modeling conducted, in this case by Charles River Associates, shows that Portfolio 9 scored so well in these scenarios because it's expected to perform so well. So it's not about scores, it's not about metrics, it's about which scenario do we or the RAC or the CPS really think is going to present the least number of risks and the most number of advantages. And the feeling here is that our committee can point out that the one that seems to have the most advantages and climate advantages seems to be Portfolio 9. And then we get into some of the concerns with Portfolio 2, which has to do with some things that have been brought up or not brought up in terms of some of its cost concerns, and in particular its emissions performance. And on that, we can spend some time digging in. The graph that's presented is approximate and also a little problematic. We can go into this in more detail. The metrics that CPS used throughout this discussion and in the modeling and everything else are intensity metrics. They then, in comparing, we don't get into this note, it's important to this conversation. In the note, we simply point out that if Portfolio 2 accomplishes the 2030 target and does so by building out quite a bit of additional gas, by their own forecasts, they will then have long-term emissions that bring it out of compliance with the cap. And that's a pretty simple concern. It's worth noting that while these are intensity reductions, CPS in the modeling and in reality is actually increasing its net production, which means that even though these are drops in intensity, the drops in actual emissions, which is what the cap actually measures, aren't as dramatic as on here. I haven't been able to collect enough data to provide an alternate chart of that. Charles Rivers should have that data. I don't. But it raises even more concerns. It's unlikely that Portfolio 2 actually achieves cap targets at all when looking at total emissions. That's my assessment. The committee said, based on what we've seen so far, it seems like Portfolio 2's compliance with cap is questionable. So in kind of concluding that, and again, opening up for much more discussions, pointing out that the cap doesn't just call us to meet one target or another. It calls us to do everything we reasonably can to quickly and significantly cut near and long-term emissions, and that CPS and CRA have shown we have the opportunity to do that. Not only that it's possible, but that it may be the most advantageous choice to make, and calling on the CPS board to take that into consideration when they're making their choice. That's really the ask. We can dive into any of those sections individually, or I defer entirely. Melissa, Dr. Cantu, how you want to kind of navigate from here.
Okay. So before we open it up, Jimmy, is there anything that you'd like to add to this? Jimmy, on mute.
You're still on mute, Dr. Perkins.
The spacebar trick's not working. Ryan points out very nicely on page 1 what the role of our committee is, and I think we need to keep in mind that we are one of the main gateways reporting to the City Council on the progress towards the cap. And this subcommittee that Ryan and I and others have been participating in really in a lot of effort, not to mention the 3 members of our committees that were on the RAC, were set up, this subcommittee was set up specifically to look at this particular problem. And it just so happens that I think quite fortuitously, the RAC and CPS were looking into issues that provided us with a lot of information about the very kinds of questions that we need to be asking. So I think it's important that no matter how we come out with this document, whether we change it completely, whether we adopt it as it is, I think, need to communicate with City Council. I think that's our role. I think we need to plant our flag. I think we need to maintain the position that we were appointed for.
Okay. So I'm going to open it up to see if any of the committee members have questions and comments. First, I'm going to turn to Angela to start off.
Yeah, so I'll just add almost to what Doug started with, is this was the Rate Advisory Committee was what our board and City Council, guided us to do, to have a community process for input into our generation planning. And so again, echoing Doug, thank you so much to Dr. Cantu, Anakwa, and Didi, because it was a lot of work and a lot of information. I mean, I sat through every 3-hour RAC meeting, and it was a lot. And so thank you so much to them. And so part of that process, the key metrics we were looking at was, in relation to CAP, is what we're calling environmental sustainability and carbon intensity, and then system reliability and climate resiliency. And so throughout the process, there were also opportunities for the, general public community to give input as well. We had open houses, we had the survey, and so the process got us to this point where both CPS Energy and the RAC are recommending Portfolio 2, but I do think it is very good for this group to have a conversation as well, and any resolution, the team comes up with, that'll just be another piece of input into the process. That's really all unless people have some specific questions, that's really the only thing I have to add at this point. Okay.
Can I ask one clarification?
Sure.
So Ryan mentioned the cap targets of carbon emissions versus carbon intensity. What is the metric? I thought it was carbon intensity.
So the climate plan,
Related to stationary or power generation.
it's based on gross emissions,
It is on
basically.
Yeah, so one of the good things about using carbon intensity is, so even though the city's climate action adaptation plan is specifically for the city of San Antonio, when we calculate our carbon intensity, we use total tons in the numerator and in the denominator, total megawatt hours. So any reductions we make will be, the benefit will be for our total customer base, not just specifically city of San Antonio. And then that carbon intensity and the electric usage of the city of San Antonio customers all go into the inputs that create the greenhouse gas inventory, and then that's how you end up with the total tons
So-
that show up.
Our emissions inventory, and that's another note for folks, we're going to be briefing Community Health, Equity, and Culture Committee on Thursday on the 2021 inventory. If you want to tune in, and then it's a slight decrease, so it's a good story, but we'll provide another briefing on that in the future. But basically, when you look at the inventory, we're not quantifying just everything that CPS is generating. It's our residential building is used this much, and then translating that into gross greenhouse gas emissions. But the metric that one of the metrics that CPS uses is that actual carbon intensity of the supply. I don't know if that helps. All right.
No, it is. It just sounds very difficult when you've got low growth and switch to electrification and all those things. So you're adding growth. Your intensity has to get even lower in order to meet your total emissions.
Yeah, that's true.
That is the dilemma that growing cities like us.
Yeah.
And how do you
And-
quantify that
and well-
when you've got electrification going on? You're taking emissions away from another sector and putting it onto the power generation sector. So,
And I will say, I don't have the chart with me, but my favorite chart that I have showed this group at one time was, we've been calculating our carbon intensity since, we started calculating it in 1995. We went all the way back, calculated to 1980. So we have a graph that shows our carbon intensity from 1980 to today, and we show that our carbon intensity has been, it wiggles, but it's on a steady downward trend. While to meet the needs of our growing community, we've been adding generations, so they crisscross. But it is, like you said, it's a challenge because we are adding, I think it's 120 megawatts a year just to keep up with growth. But that all goes
And that's
into
why the STEP program is so important.
Yeah.
And anything that we can get to just reduce consumption has to be a key to this. Yeah, awesome stuff.
So I'm not seeing any hands. Okay. Go ahead, Miriam.
Thanks. Sorry, I was looking for the raise hand function and I can't find it today. So WebEx is always changing. Sorry about that. It's a very basic question. Brian, I think you guys did a great job trying to write this up. It's well written. I appreciate all the background information that's there. One of the things that would help maybe a little bit with clarity is providing a couple of sentences here and there that describe what we're comparing against. It took a few paragraphs for it to get down to that the RAC is recommending portfolio 9 portfolio 2 compared to portfolio 9, things like that. I know we don't want to make it long, but one of those might help. My question though is, I apologize if I've missed something, but the table 1 that's provided has the 5 categories: system reliability, environmental sustainability, affordability, system flexibility, and workforce impact, with weighting based on what? Is that based only on the survey results? It wasn't clear to me where that weighting came from.
It is
Dr.
based on.
Cantu?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, Dr. Cantu is better placed to answer.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The weighting in
weighting.
table 1, where did those
It's
weights
from
come from?
It was determined by the RAC in a process that Dr. Cantu or
I'm
Didi could speak
sorry.
to.
I'm sorry, Ryan. Yes, we went through the process in the RAC of prioritizing different goals. And there were, if I can maybe, I don't know, of these goals, we were given dots. And every board member had 5 dots to put on their, what they felt was the most important goals for the generation planning as we were thinking about it with CPS. And so we definitely had a quorum on that day. Everybody got the same number of dots. For people who joined us online, it was also done, and I don't understand the technology behind it, but they were also given input into it. And so that's how the weighting arrived for those top 5 goals.
I see. Okay,
And
that's
that's
helpful.
then what was used in terms of the report from Charles River to classify all the portfolios and how they measured.
Thank you. That's very helpful because I also was reading through the Angela email that shared, and thank you, Angela, for being so good about updating us with all the CPS Energy survey results and meetings and things like that. The final survey results seemed to have a different set of priorities compared to this table, and we don't really seem to address that in this report. And it might just be helpful to provide a little bit more clarity on whether or not that was considered as part of this table or not. That was my only question or comment. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Cantu.
If I could pick up on that comment from Miriam, thank you. And I do want to also applaud Dr. Perkins and Ryan for the wonderful work that they've done and committed a lot of time and energy to this project. And thank you so much for that. And I wanted to pick something from what Miriam said, pick up on that in terms of the survey. Angela, thank you for sending us and including us all in the surveys. I can't answer your question, Miriam, about why those may not have been included and importance of including it. But one of the things that I was a bit concerned about, and Angela, I did send you an email wondering if that report or those survey, as well as the narrative comments that were received from the community, were in some way put in a compact form to give to our Board of Trustees, because it's a lot of information on those surveys. I mean, I went through it and through the narrative, and it does take some time to get through that. So given that, I do have a concern that how much of that community input is being given to the board in a digestible way so that can inform some of the decisions they're making. So I just wanted to pick up on it there because Miriam did bring out the issues about comments and the surveys in that. And so given that, and to address some of what Ryan is saying, I wonder how much of the choice of portfolio 2 and then the Board of Trustees making that, how much of the community input from the open houses are really given to the board to inform their decisions. So that was definitely one comment I wanted to put out there. The second is that I totally agree with what Dr. Perkins and Ryan are saying. Our charge as a CAP, and I'm putting on my CAP hat right now, is that we make some observations and some recommendations going forward. So I think it's important for the Board of Trustees as well as City Council to hear what this body's recommendation is. Now, what the impact of that will be, I'm not sure, but I think it's important to be able to have that on record. Thank you.
Go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, so I'll just add some, I think I'll kind of be a little bit repeating what Dr. Cantu just said, is that, so the results that you see in the table, Miriam, were based on the RAC priorities of those, prioritization of those 5 things. And the results from the survey, all of that information is also being shared with our board as additional community input, but we didn't go back and change the table because that table was for the RAC and their process and their recommendation. So it's based on their weighting. Does that kind of make sense?
It does, thank you. And I think what would be helpful is, again, just a small point of clarity in there to describe where table one comes from. I might have missed that. But is that available in another document that might provide text as a reference, where if you wanted to go read that, you could? That might have helped me just a little bit. But I
Yeah,
understand
so
what you're saying. Thank you.
Yeah, all tables and charts are available publicly on our website, on our RAC page. If there's any particular one you need me to pull for you or help you find, just get with me after the meeting and I can do that.
I was thinking about, as a reference, kind of maybe a footnote on this document, just to say where it comes from. I'm sorry, I live in research land, and there's always a references section at the
Cite
end
your
that
source.
you cite where your tables and stuff come from, which just provides a level of clarity that might be helpful.
Okay, Marvin?
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's very well written. And I was wondering, are you still accepting comments on it, or did I miss a time frame? Like,
No, so we're doing that now. So if you have a comment, we'd love to hear it.
okay, table one, what are the units, those factors in there? I understand the waiting row, but the units of those other ones, they look like percentages, but some of them are greater than 1.
Yeah, so the data and the backing of getting to those numbers was its own kind of fraught process. These are the simplified scores, or the combined scores, provided by Charles Rivers Associate when they went to quantify and do quartile scoring on the categories they evaluated. So Miriam, to your point, this is all drawn from, I believe, the November 17th RAC presentation. The only reason it's here, as opposed to simply saying, go see that presentation, is one of the things that was missing in every presentation that we witnessed was a quartile mapping that actually ranked them by score. They were always ranked numerically, and they were not actually given the kind of color coding of performance. So these scores, so while in fact, every other table that was presented indicated which portfolios did better, or how performance was better in some cases and less in others, these final results, the scores as weighted by the RAC priorities, never were. So we took the values and simply put it into a table that is exactly the same format and structure. It's just ordered and showing the quartiles the way it was done on every other metric that was prescribed. So we are adding to the conversation by using the data from the RAC slide to present it more clearly. But to your point, Marvin, I couldn't even tell you what metric these are. These are a percentage of a 4-point quartile, which was itself kind of a rounded scoring by category level, added up and then averaged. And there are lots of problems that I personally had with kind of how the scoring was done, but that's the methodology used. That's a separate critique and not one we're trying to make here. I don't know what to call them other than to call them the weighted scores. I don't know what other metric to describe that as.
Okay, so oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, they prefer proposal 2, which is a blend, and they don't favor the proposals that are straight renewable, so there's some resistance. Is there a way that we can address this resistance?
Yeah, I think, and this is Marvin, this has been sort of the challenge with there's a lot behind all of this, and I think what I would sort of say is where CPS and the RAC ended, they had 9 portfolios, but then through a series of process of elimination, came up with a handful of, was it 4 or 5, Angela? And then from that, again, trying to weigh all the different, reliability, affordability, resilience, came up with P2 and P9 as the 2 preferred. And then I think CPS staff had recommended P2 for different reasons. So I think it's tough to unpack as far as, there are portfolios that have much more renewables, but then they didn't meet other minimum standards that CPS and the RAC had in terms of reliability and affordability. Does that answer your question, sort of?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, at what point do they finalize, like which one they're gonna go with, 2 or 9?
On Monday, January 23rd, so Monday coming up is when our board has it on their agenda to vote on a portfolio.
But the RAC made the recommendation. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a majority was recommending P2
Correct.
to the full Board of Trustees.
And that was
And so
done in
that's-
December.
Yes, ma'am. So that's one of the reasons why we kind of wanted to make sure that we were able to develop a resolution with a statement, just listing what our recommendations were or how we viewed the portfolios so that we could also present this to the mayor, the council, and the board of trustees.
And I think the thing that's nice about the letter, I think this still needs to be discussed, but it's highlighting all the good stuff, right? This was an excellent iteration of where we're going, and I think it, again, it's to be duplicated. That's the new standard going forward. But it's, again, through the lens of the climate plan,
Right.
just making sure that.
And looking at the table, I mean, you see that P2 is not the bottom one in red. I mean, it's up there with P9. Are there any additional comments?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I got one more. If you could define community priorities as they are related to your items in the columns of Table 1.
Could you repeat that?
Within the text of the document, it refers to community priorities, how Portfolio 9 was the highest scoring community priorities. And I'd like to see how that relates to the column headings in Table 1.
So, Brian, I don't know if you want to take a stab, but to me that reads the system reliability, the environmental sustainability, the affordability. Are those the components?
Yeah, I mean, specifically the intention there, and I would love to phrase it more clearly, would be that Portfolio 9 was the highest scoring in the combined score, which is the score that takes into account the RAC-defined community priorities.
Oh, thanks. Okay, I see that now.
So what I'm hearing is, as far as comments to the document, just for clarification, maybe adding a footnote for the source of the table, which probably would explain some of the questions that are being asked or the comments that are being made. Is that a fair adjustment to be made or change to be made? Seeing yes, okay.
I have a couple comments.
You have additional comments?
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
So, again, as everybody pointed out, very well-written document, it's very clear. I guess from my perspective, I'm a supporter of P2, which I may be an outlier in this group, but from my perspective, I think it makes significant strides on the environmental sustainability and does a better job of balancing the other community priorities with reliability and affordability and flexibility. I mean, we talked a lot about the RAC weighting and then also the community priorities. If we look at the last priority or survey results from the community, the top, they reiterated system reliability was top. I think affordability was 2, system flexibility was 3, environmental sustainability almost dropped to number 4 in that. So if we were to re-weight this with that survey, which I don't think is appropriate because we don't know who participated in that survey. I think the RAC is probably but I think clearly the guidance that board is getting from the community is those other 3 are major priorities for the community. So, and I think the other thing we can keep in mind is Portfolio 2 also provides, another aspect of CAP goals, which is the adaptability part, because it does provide a more resilient system, in a changing climate with more extreme weather that I think we should probably highlight. It is worth highlighting that P2 does that. But those are kind of my comments. And the other thing I would point out is, we've highlighted, table 1, but I've monitored quite closely the discussion that's gone on, and I've been very impressed with the thoughtful discussion that the board had related to these. I mean, they're very in tune with this. Dr. Romero asked specific questions that are, kind of address these concerns, like the affordability metric. Yes, P9 does score better than P2 on the affordability, but she asked, and Charles Rivers reiterated, that when you factor in the extreme weather part of that, it completely flips that metric. So basically the extreme weather takes into account what happens if we have one extreme weather event. What is the cost of that? And so when you factor in that cost, and you add that cost into it, it flips the metric around, where now P2 is more affordable than P9. So there's more to it than just this, gross score. I've been involved in, similar kinds of weighting systems when you're trying to make a discussion or a decision, and you always end up with, a couple top 3 that you can't really differentiate just on the numbers alone. You have to take in other considerations. And in my mind, it seems like the board and council, the mayor came out this morning supporting P2, has done a thoughtful job at factoring all those things in. So that's kind of where I land on this. I think there is a place to make a statement. Taking a hard line and saying P9 is what this, I understand that this committee is focused mainly on the emissions part, but from a community perspective, I still think P2 is the better portfolio. And again, as they pointed out, and they keep reiterating, this just sets you up for the next 10 years to be able to get into 2030 to 2040 and 2050, when new technologies may be able to fix this. I mean, and even if you look at P9 now, I mean, there's technologies in there that it's relying on in P9 for those outer emissions targets that don't exist today or not commercial. So both scenarios are relying on new technologies down the road in order to meet these emissions targets.
So is there specific sections that you'd like to delete or specific statements that you'd like to add?
Well, I mean, I think it would be, again, my view is I think we could, if it was my document, I would support P2, highlight the fact that it meets, CAP goals regarding adaptability. I think the parts related to the process are, very positive. I just have a little bit of trouble with some of these points that are made because I think they've been addressed thoughtfully already by the board. So.
Try to incorporate how we would add your comments. Okay. Is there anyone? Oh, I see Marvin. You have another comment? Okay. Adelita?
Thank you, David, for those really thoughtful comments. I think you definitely bring up some good points and some good perspectives on it. And I would, just as we did with the RAC, certainly there is no reason whatever this body decides for this document, that P9 would be our recommendation. There's no reason that we can't also include the thoughts of members on P2 as well. And we did that at the RAC. So certainly the majority of the RAC members were for P2, but there were some for P9 and P6 as well. So I think that is important as we think about us as a committee. It's a collaborative committee. And so I think we need to express that collaboration in any kind of document that we do produce. The one thing I did want to say on affordability, and some really, really good points, particularly after we experienced what we did with the winter storm. Unfortunately, and this is not just CPS, but many programs like this, or many exercises like this, think of just affordability as utility, but affordability is also all the healthcare costs that go with emissions and other things that has an impact financially on people as well. So I just wanted to state that affordability needs to be broadened as we think about it. For this exercise, it's not just the affordability of my utilities, but what it produces outside of that has a financial impact on individual customers.
Let me make one comment. That's an excellent point on the affordability related to healthcare. I think one of the things that we should point out is this eliminates coal, right? Which eliminates a lot of the health costs. Because, you know, natural gas versus renewables, from my understanding, doesn't have a health impact cost to the community.
Yeah, there's still, natural gas still has emissions associated with it.
Yeah, so the primary emissions that will be eliminated are particulate matter. So natural gas doesn't, it makes like...
Oh, it's better. It's better.
But particulate matter, and then mercury is another one that coal units produce, but natural gas doesn't, and also sulfur dioxide. They're another one. And I'll just say sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, and mercury are all currently very well controlled on Spruce 1 and Spruce 2, but you'd be eliminating them completely, even with the switch over to natural gas.
Definitely an improvement.
Yeah.
And the other thing that does eliminate is the coal ash, which is also very harmful.
Okay, any other, I see one more.
Deanna has her hand raised. I see it here.
Everybody, thank you for the conversation. You know, I think we're all in agreement that coal has to go, and I like that. I think I do not agree that natural gas does not have any impact on health and in the environment. And I think particularly the impacts from mining and coming from the community around Port San Antonio is where I come from. And so that's something that we also take into account, many environmentalists and environmental justice folks. And so I also just wanted to put that out there as folks are considering some of these pieces. And I think really looking at like what is so I'm outside with the kids. It's my kids' time right now. Looking at really what is our actual impact? Like if we're offering a resolution, like will the board members be able to like take in consideration some of this work? I mean, I understand that it's been around 6 months or so since this conversation has been happening. And so, yeah, and I actually seen some of what some of the future pieces might be. I think could be important, but I also just wanted to note that natural gas in addition to coal also is a large producer of pollution as well as health damages.
Okay, Dr. P?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to give a little bit more perspective on the document in the background, and also relative to David's comments, which I appreciate those comments very much. But I would point out that we've talked about the subjectivity in the 5 community inputs, sustainability, et cetera, and how those were determined, and they are extremely subjective. I mean, basically, you just took a range of values and you said, okay, this is quartile 1, this is quartile 2, this is 3, and then you give them 1, 2, 3, 4. You can use those kind of scoring systems typically to get any result that you want. Not that I'm saying that the process was gained, but as we've also talked about, it was subjective. But beyond that, the inputs that went into the modeling were also in many cases subjective. They were best guesses. They were what, indeed, Charles River and the other consultants know a hell of a lot more about this than I do. And I'm sure they use their best ideas, but you can argue with all of those. And you can argue adequately with all those. I think that Ryan found a good balance in between one extreme P2 and the other extreme P9. My biggest problem with P2 is that from my position, if I had been on the rack, I would have argued this, it should have never been considered in the first place without modification. One, it runs the Spruce power plant that's being converted from coal to natural gas until 2065. How can you meet a 2050 goal of net zero when you're burning gas until 2065? Well, I'm assuming they're going to pump the CO2 into the ground. I don't know what they're going to do with the methane that leaks from the wells, but that to me is an automatic disqualifier. So I think on balance, Ryan's done a great job in the document of, in a succinct fashion, making a recommendation to the city council that I certainly can live with. Not as strong as I would have put it, but certainly I can live with it. And Angela, I just asked one question about the health criteria, the health pollutants. In terms of burning methane, we do produce some small particulate. Is that going to be well controlled? I'm talking about ultrafine particulate.
So I'll go back to one of your first, I think was kind of a question or a statement. As far as Spruce 2 running on natural gas till 2065, I think that's an assumption in this iteration, but I think this was really to get us through 2030. And as we figure out how to also get to 2040, there'll be, updates and changes made in technology. So I wouldn't say for sure Spruce 2 is going to run on natural gas till 2065. I think there'll be changes as we go through it. And then, so natural gas does produce some particulate matter, but when you look at our charts that we, in our annual sustainability report, one of the emissions we do charts on is particulate matter. And I don't really think it's gonna, when you're looking at the difference between coal and natural gas, the natural gas particulate matter is so small that it doesn't even show up on the chart, if that makes sense. There is some, but it's very small.
Okay, I'll have to look further into that. But I would say, to me, it's a slap in the face to show 2065 in those charts when you don't really intend for 2065. Why not make it 2050? Why not make it 2045? And I doubt that the modeling would have mattered that much difference. But to me, it's we have a set of goals. CPS signed on to those goals, and now they're writing down on a piece of paper, at least for the public to interpret, that they're going to violate the goal. I won't belabor anymore.
I can ask that question, Dr. Perkins, but I do know this gets us to our 2030 cap goal, and there'll be much improvement that we'll need to get to the 2040 and the 2050.
Yeah.
Angela, could we actually take a second on that? Because one of the things that is really germane to this committee, and what I've really had a hard time pinning down, it has been said repeatedly that Portfolio 2 does achieve the 2040 cap target. But of course, the 2030 cap target, it does not meet the 2040. The 2030 cap target, though, as we started the meeting out, is about total emissions. And I don't see anywhere in the data where we've shown that Portfolio 2 will achieve that level of total emissions. I have seen in the data that it will achieve 44% intensity reduction against a 41% 2030 target. But if that assumes CPS, in other words, it only achieves the 2030 target if CPS's output by 2030 is about the same that it was as 2016 when we're measuring against, right? If the amount they're producing has changed, I don't actually think, in fact, let me put it differently, I don't think I've seen any evidence, and I'm not sure I've seen any evidence presented in any of the RAC, CPS, or city council meetings I've been in that Portfolio 2 actually does achieve the cap. I've seen someone look at an intensity percentage and say that that's the same as achieving a total emissions percentage, which we know is not mathematically true or correct. And then they've used the argument that Portfolio 2 is compliant with the cap as a justification for why we can make a 25-year plan based on a short-term target instead of making a long-term plan based on a long-term target. Once we get to 2050 net zero, the difference between intensity and total emissions goes away because zero is zero. But at 2030, I don't actually see and have not been able to find any data that supports that Portfolio 2 does achieve the 2030 cap target. And in fact, I can't even say definitively that Portfolio 9 will, because it depends on what the production is. I'm looking at some rough numbers that suggest rather than a 40% reduction in total emissions, which is what's requested by the cap, 41%, I'm looking at some numbers that suggest the projected emissions intensity against the projected output by 2030 could be as low as a 10% reduction. Now, I'd love some better math and somebody with some time to look into this, but if the city and CPS and everyone is telling us that Portfolio 2 is acceptable because it meets the cap 2030 target, I'd like to see some evidence of that. I can't find any.
So Ryan, the carbon intensity includes both tons of carbon that's converted to pounds over total generation. And in the appendix somewhere, I'd have to go look it up, there are other charts, or I don't know if they're in the appendix, I haven't seen it myself, but when you're calculating that carbon intensity, you have to have the total tons in order to get to that number. So I know in the data, we have total tons.
So does it include growth in that as well?
Yeah, so all total generation, as it's growing to serve our growing community, it's included in that carbon intensity in the denominator. And I haven't done the exact math for each of these portfolios, but when we were, back when we were showing the options for flexible paths, if you took the carbon intensity and multiplied it by the generation for City of San Antonio customers, the percent reductions were very close to each other. So it's the 41% and compared to the 41 in 2030 and the 71% in 2040. And so carbon intensity from a CPS Energy perspective as the input we give to the city is the right metric to use and to compare those percent reductions to.
Dee, I see your hand up.
Thank you. I want to thank Ryan for drafting this document. I've been pretty quiet on all this because I do serve on the RAC, and I feel like I've been saying a lot of this stuff already. But thanks, Ryan, for pointing out the benefits of a Portfolio 9, not just because I wrote that portfolio. I wrote 5 of the portfolios that were actually modeled, but you really did take a good hard look at affordability. reliability, and also weighing it against the priorities of the RAC. It actually scored the best. So you did a lot of homework on this, and thanks again. But I want us to not, and I think Deanna kind of touched on this. Uh, I I want to celebrate. I am going to celebrate that we're shutting a coal plant down. It was past due. But I don't like to see this trade-off of, well, natural gas is so much better than coal, because it's not. And methane is accelerating, the climate crisis. It is a warming. It has great warming potentials for our planet. Um, Natural gas has failed us in so many different ways. It failed during Winter Storm Uri. If we looked at the summertime when gas plants were going down for maintenance, if it weren't for different utilities and energy efficiency measures, and wind and solar being the backup to gas, we could have had a different summer in terms of outages. So, and we also, as CAP members, have to look and understand that that so much pollution comes from natural gas in production, in processing, and in transportation. The amount of leaks of methane, and I should have come more prepared with the studies that from the Environmental Defense Fund that validate all of what I just said. So I think we need to consider that at least in Portfolio 9, there is a hard stop for natural gas. We have an end date to it. So also, in terms of pollution, I did ask, CPS Energy, can we consider, other pollutants and the health impacts, the environmental impacts, and those weren't considered, given, I think, that the time and the timing of it, and also the ask, and also having to go back and run scenarios again. But I would say that Portfolio doesn't align with a lot of, Portfolio 2 doesn't align with a lot, especially in terms of our, of where we want to see, where we need to be in terms of our CAP targets, and what the city of San Antonio and what CPS Energy sign on to, that Portfolio 9 is a better option for us, I think, to move forward. But once again, thanks Ryan, for all the work that you put into it.
Marvin?
Oh, good evening. Thanks again. I just noticed that the data in Table 2 is strictly from electrical generation. So you're the forthcoming in the transportation sector, you're going to have some drops in carbon. So it'd be interesting to see how that's going to change that dynamic. Maybe you'd get some cuts for, like, with the oncoming change in the non-attainment status to moderate is going to force like an inspection maintenance program for cars. That's short term. But I'm just wondering if those kinds of cuts are going to make that hit the target, and if that's going to be addressed at a later time. That might be off subject, but it looks just like a positive, perhaps.
Yeah, it's relevant, Mark. I'd say that this is we have the overarching target, and then we actually have sub targets. So there is a target specifically on what's called stationary generation, and that's what this is looking at. There is a separate target on transportation. I think it's actually fascinating, though again, there's only so much time on these statements, to think about how these interact. David mentioned, for example, that the electrification is really moving emissions from one sector to the other. That is a valid point, and it's part of this. It is part of what was built in the considerations of making the cap, and we can go back and relitigate the cap and the targets. But it is interesting to note, in fact, one of the challenges I point out in the text is that Portfolio 9 dives far enough below by 2030 that it allows the overall city, it may actually basically subsidize the longer time it's going to take to achieve emissions reductions in the transportation sector. If we, in the electricity generation, just barely make our target, and transportation doesn't make its target, which I don't think anyone expects it to because of the transition of the technology, San Antonio as a whole will fail our 2030 target. And while it is not CPS's responsibility to carry the whole city on their back, the truth is, if Portfolio 9 is such a strong performer on affordability, reliability, and other areas, CPS has the ability to take that pathway, which has the added bonus of potentially helping the overall city achieve its 2030 target, even if transportation and other sectors struggle. Now, there's a lot of ifs in there, so I don't mean to belabor that point. But it's, again, the point that you're right. We are in charge of the total cap, not just the electricity cap, not just the transport cap. And if we're looking for risks that might cause us not to hit those cap targets or opportunities to better achieve them, Portfolio 9 certainly suggests from this modeling an opportunity to increase the chances that we do make the 2030 cap target.
Just to piggyback on Marvin's question, answer as best I can. CPS did, I mean, again, there's hundreds, thousands of pages. I remember some of the modeling did include, well, what does a penetration of electric vehicles of X percent in the next 20 years look like? So I think they are looking at the transition as a part of the modeling that they were doing.
Yes, we look at EV adoption as part of our generation growth. Yes.
So I'm going to make the recommendation that we move forward and see where we are if we take a vote on the resolution. Again.
Well, if I could just pause. Were there, I feel like there was one or two points that were raised.
So the addition or the change proposed would be to add the footnote for the table to clarify a lot of the questions that were discussed today. That was the only thing that I really wrote. David, I'm not sure how to address your comments.
Yeah, no, I don't think you will.
And so if that suffices everybody else's concerns, is adding that footnote to address the ratios, where they came from. I'm getting some nods, yes. So I'm gonna.
One other edit, Melissa, would just be because we didn't have quorum on the equity committee. In the last paragraph, I assume we need to move that their attribution, just so we're not misstating.
That's what I was just going to say. Thank you, Ryan. And there is
Okay.
a comment from Karen in the chat. She hasn't had the opportunity to discuss the issue with anyone at SAWS because I am serving as a SAWS rep. I really cannot make a vote on this without that.
Okay. So when I get to you, Karen, just abstain.
Yeah, just letting folks know why. Sorry.
And from just a practical step, if there is a vote, does it approve process as far as what's next, where does it go, and who's it coming from? So I think the thought is it would come from the two chairs and the co-chairs, and then it would go to the Board of Trustees and Mayor and Council. Does that sound appropriate?
They'd come from the one chair.
That's right, because we don't have the
We don't have a quorum for I couldn't put it forward for the climate and equity.
Gotcha.
Okay.
And then we do have a note from Miriam saying, again, as a representative, feel free to jump on, maybe that as a rep of Swery, without having the opportunity to brief leadership, that she would have to abstain.
Okay. So I guess Leslie, we can do a roll call on moving forward with the action of approval of proposed resolution in response to the approved CPS rate advisory committee portfolio selection.
Need a motion in a second, sure?
Yes, I need a motion. Is someone willing to make a motion?
I'm happy to move as chair of the Energy Subcommittee.
Okay, so Ryan, anybody second?
I'll second. Stephen Lucky.
Steven, okay. All right, start from the bottom. David Walter,
No.
Miriam Duckett,
Abstain, thank you.
Angela Rodriguez,
I'm also abstaining because I work with CPS Energy.
Marvin Pear,
Yes.
Tammy's not here. Karen Guz,
Abstain?
John Placia,
Yes.
Brian Weber,
Yes.
Dr. Perkins,
Yes.
Stephen Lucky,
Yay.
Dr. DeBage,
Yes.
Matt on?
Matt's not here.
Estella Trevino,
Yes.
Ashley Bird,
Yes.
Dee Dee Belmaris,
Yes.
and Melissa Bryant. I also have to abstain.
What?
Sorry.
Okay. So that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah.
So we have 9, which is majority, so the motion passes.
Okay. Right? 9. Yes, Garth. Alma, are you on?
She dropped off.
Sean, does it need to be the majority of the full group or just the folks that are present?
Majority of the member present.
Okay, so the motion passes. So I think what we'll do is we'll work with you to get the format, make all the edits, and then we'll send it around for one last view to make sure everybody's okay with it before sending it out. But I think the goal would be to get it out before the end of the week, right?
Okay, and we have a board meeting tomorrow, so I can run it through my team so that I can sign off on the letter.
Okay. Okay.
And so the goal would be to get it by the end of the week so that the Board of Trustees will have it by Monday? Or it will be?
Correct. Just so
Yeah, okay, got it. I just wanted to be sure.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Thank you. Again, this is just sort of, again, to summarize, none of this is easy. And, I was talking to somebody today, and I don't envy CPS because no matter what you do, somebody's going to say, and you guys don't have a crystal ball. So, Angela, I want to thank you for continuing to stick with us and to come and provide us with the briefing. Before we go, I think there's just a few things that we wanted to sort of give you a heads up on.
So we do have one public comment that came in. It was by Jeannie Yoshimoto. She did say she'd like to submit the following question for consideration at the Joint Climate Advisory Committee today. Her comment is, I'd like to invest in community solar as my roof is not suitable to host solar. When will there be a new round of community solar options? What is San Antonio doing to promote community or roofless solar? From an equity perspective, community solar is one of the only options many San Antonio residents have in order to reap the financial and environmental benefits of clean energy. Thank you.
Want to just do a quick 2 seconds? Because I'm sure more community solar is coming.
Yeah, so our board, just last year, I can't remember the month anymore, did approve the second phase of our energy efficiency and conservation program. So the first one we called the Save for Tomorrow Energy Plan. We're reusing the acronym. It's called Sustainable Tomorrow Energy Plan. And so that's been approved to go through 2027, and we're currently coming up with all of the programs that will be under that, and community solar is likely going to be part of that. And again, direction from the RAC and our board was to also have an equity focus in those new programs. So I think all of the comments we just heard are going to be addressed in that Sustainable Tomorrow Energy Plan. I just can't tell you when those new programs are going to roll out.
Okay.
Pull up that one slide, sort of has those next meeting.
Again, this was a special meeting, so the next meeting will be next month,
February 28th.
February 28th, and then go to the next slide. Just sort of different things that I think staff really wants to make sure that you're updated on, and then if there's any other items that anybody would like to bring forward, just please feel free to get in touch with our chairs or staff. But the greenhouse gas inventory, again, some good stuff, but not where we need it to be. The new Resiliency, Energy Efficiency, and Sustainability Fund that Council approved in this last budget. There's a program that City leadership team presented to City Council, allocating funding to provide grants to K-12 schools to implement sustainability work in line with the climate plan. One of the things our manager was interested in is having potentially a role of this committee to help review, and so we'll want to sort of brief you on what that's looking like and what the role of this committee could look like. We're definitely going to weigh in on give you a little more detail on what we're seeing in terms of staff review and recommendations regarding the equity screening tool. And there was one thing in my head, and I just lost it. So those are the three big ones right now. But again, if anybody has any items that you want to bring forward, I think it might be good to set some time at this meeting to really, again, talk about priorities. That's some of the things we were able to check off our box. We got some UDC amendments. We got the energy code was updated. So maybe talking about what are those priorities for the remainder of this year that this group might want to dig in on.
Yeah, I had a question. Are the two committees going to continue to meet
Thank you.
as one?
That's what I forgot. So thank you for bringing it up. Yep, we've been talking with Councilwoman Sandoval's office, and I'm sure everybody heard the councilwoman is stepping down at the end of the month, which is a big loss for us. She's our big champion. But I think where we are at the staff level and with D7 is I think we'd like to combine both committees. We think that just from an efficiency perspective, it's a lot to manage two separate committees. What we'd like to do is work with a subset of you all to figure out what that could look like. Because right now I think juggling two agendas, it just doesn't seem to be efficient. But we want to have some feedback as far as what that could look like. So that's that. So I guess the answer is our recommendation is yes, that there should be just a joint one committee. We could still create an additional equity group sort of focus, but I think we're just really looking at time constraints and trying to be as efficient as possible. That's I think we need to have more conversation around that.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think that definitely removes the accountability piece on this committee, on the technical community advisory committee, when we don't have an equity team doing that screening. So I hope we could have a more robust conversation. I'm not sure if the equity committee members were even considered on those conversations.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to want to bring everybody together. We've had challenges getting the equity committee with quorum. So I think the hope is we're going to land in a better place. But definitely, we don't want to we're not simply gonna just say we're gonna do, we just wanna make sure you guys are part of the conversation to make sure that whatever we end up is gonna do what we need it to do.
Okay. All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn? David? Second? All right.
Who was the second?
Who was the second?
Jimmy?
Jimmy. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care. Happy New Year's.
So if you combine the groups, they're just gonna take the membership of both and.
That's what we have to figure. I mean, that's a